A father sold his daughter to a monster to save his failing farm. He thought it was a simple deal, a signature on a piece of paper in exchange for a roof over his head. But he had no idea what he'd just unleashed. He didn't know the man he'd sold her to wasn't just a rancher. He was a collector. And his last two wives, they'd both ended up in the ground before their first anniversary. Out on that same prairie, a Lakota scout named Swift Arrow was riding with a storm at his back, carrying a secret that would set the whole territory on fire. He was hunting the same monster, but for a different reason entirely. The three of them were about to collide in a storm of dust, blood, and secrets. And when the dust settled, no one would be who you thought they were. The heat in the Montana territory didn't just bake the land, it suffocated you. Catherine Blackwood felt it pressing down as she hung the last of the laundry, the cottonwood tree offering no real relief. At 22, she had a strength in her eyes that 7 frontier winters had hammered into place. But these days, that strength felt like the only thing holding her together. The homestead, once her family's dream, had become a cage. "Catherine, get in here, girl!" Her father's voice, rough as splintered wood from whiskey and cheap tobacco, cut through the quiet. She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. Since her mother had died of fever last winter, Thomas Blackwood had fallen into a bottle and never climbed out. The drought had killed the crops, and the debt collectors were circling like vultures. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of stale liquor. Her father sat at the table, a bottle his only friend. Across from him, Jeremiah Sloane's presence seemed to suck all the light from the room. Sloane was 45, a man who had carved a cattle empire out of the land through sheer brutality. His dark hair had a streak of silver, and his eyes, cold and gray as riverstones, looked at Catherine not like a woman, but like a prize steer he was about to purchase. "There she is," her father slurred, a pathetic, forced smile on his face. "My Catherine." Catherine gave a slight nod, keeping her eyes down. She knew the stories. Everyone did. Sloane's first wife had supposedly fallen down a flight of stairs in a house that had no second story. His second had wasted away from a sickness that came on just days after she'd been seen arguing with him in town. The man was a walking graveyard. "We've been discussing your future, Catherine," her father said, his words stumbling over each other. "Mr. Sloane has generously offered to take care of our situation." Her stomach twisted into a knot. She'd known this was coming. Sloane's visits, the gifts of food, the loans her father could never repay. It had all been a trap, and she was the bait. "I've agreed to clear your father's debts," Sloane said, his voice smooth but with an edge like a newly sharpened knife. "In exchange, we'll be wed. This Sunday." 4 days. The walls of the cabin seemed to press in on her. "Father, may I speak with you privately?" "Nothing to discuss," Thomas snapped, his shame turning to anger. "It's done. The papers are signed." "Papers?" Her voice was a whisper. Sloane pulled a folded document from his vest. "A marriage contract. Your father has consented. It includes provisions for this homestead. It will remain in his name, with him living here." The threat was clear as glass. Refuse, and her father would be out on the prairie with nothing but the clothes on his back. "You should be grateful," her father hissed. "Men like Jeremiah Sloane don't look at girls from failed farms." Catherine felt like a pawn on a chessboard, moved by hands she couldn't control. "And if I refuse?" Sloane's smile was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "Then I collect your father's debts. Immediately. Winter's coming, Miss Blackwood. Where would an old man like him go?" He stood up, placing his expensive hat on his head. "Oh, and Catherine, wear the blue dress I sent over. It brings out the color in your eyes." After he left, the silence in the cabin was an accusation. "You had no right," she whispered. "No right!" Her father slammed his fist on the table. "I had every right. I'm keeping a roof over our heads." His anger crumbled into a desperate plea. "Cat, please. I've failed at everything. Don't make me fail at this too." She couldn't look at him. She fled the cabin, running past the withered corn stalks and the dust where a garden used to be. She didn't stop until she reached the creek, now just a muddy trickle. Only then did she let the tears fall, not for herself, but for the dream her family had chased west, a dream that had died right here in the dirt. But what she didn't know was that someone was watching her from the ridge. Someone who knew Jeremiah Sloan was more than just a bully. He was a killer. And he was about to change everything. 20 miles to the west, Swift Arrow urged his paint horse through the pines. At 28, he was a man of two worlds, belonging to neither. His father was a Lakota holy man, his mother the daughter of a French-Canadian trapper. He'd learned the ways of his people and the language of the whites at a mission school, a skill that made him a valuable scout for the U.S. Army. But it was a dangerous line to walk. He was carrying dispatches to the territorial governor, reports of rising tensions over the gold found in the Black Hills. He'd planned to make camp, but the sky was promising a storm. He knew of a homestead near Red Fork Creek, owned by a farmer named Blackwood, a man who'd always traded fairly. He decided to seek shelter there. As he crested the ridge overlooking the Blackwood place, he saw her, a woman kneeling by the creek, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He recognized Catherine Blackwood from his previous visits. They had never spoken much, but he'd seen a quiet strength in her. He hesitated to approach. A lone Lakota appearing suddenly could frighten a white woman. But before he could decide, he heard the thunder of hooves from the east, 5 riders, and he recognized the man in the lead instantly, Jeremiah Sloan. The cattle baron's reputation for cruelty was a dark cloud over the entire territory. Sloan's men had been tied to the massacre of a Lakota hunting party last winter, though nothing was ever proven. Swift Arrow watched as Sloan and his men reined in their horses right in front of the crying woman. "Catherine," Sloan's voice carried on the wind, thick with false concern. "I've had second thoughts about Sunday." Even from a distance, Swift Arrow could see her tense up. "Why wait?" Sloan boomed. "I've brought Reverend Collins with me." He gestured to a nervous-looking man on a mule. "We'll have the ceremony tomorrow." "Tomorrow." Swift Arrow saw the flash of sheer panic on Catherine's face before she masked it. Something was deeply wrong here. She was being coerced. "My men will escort you back to the cabin," Sloan said, nodding to 2 of his thugs. "Wouldn't want you getting lost." The words were a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. As Catherine was led away like a prisoner, Swift Arrow melted back into the trees. The Army's dispatches could wait. He had a reputation for finding things that were lost. But he wasn't just a scout for the Army. He was there on a secret mission. He'd been investigating the disappearance of Sloan's second wife for months. She was the sister of a fellow scout, a friend who had been murdered while looking into Sloan. This wasn't just a matter of justice anymore. For Swift Arrow, it was personal, and he had a feeling Catherine Blackwood was the key to unlocking it all. He just had to get to her before Sloan buried her, along with his other secrets. The storm broke as night fell, lashing rain against the walls of the small cabin. Inside, Thomas Blackwood had passed out drunk at the table. In her small room, separated from the main cabin by a thin curtain, Catherine sat on her bed, rigid. The blue dress Sloan had given her hung on a peg, a beautiful shroud for a life she didn't want. She clutched the locket her mother had given her, the only thing of value she had left. "What would you do, Mother?" she whispered into the dark. A sharp scratch at her window made her jump. Her first thought was Sloan's men. But when she peeked through the rain-streaked glass, it wasn't one of them. It was the Lakota scout. Swift Arrow. His face was calm, his eyes intelligent. For some reason, the sight of this stranger felt less threatening than the man who was supposed to be her husband. She unlatched the window. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I must speak with you." "Swift Arrow, isn't it?" she whispered, glancing toward her sleeping father. He nodded. "I saw Sloan bring you back. You are in danger." The words spilled out of her before she could stop them. "He's forcing me into a marriage. The ceremony is tomorrow." His expression darkened. "I know of this man. His wives have a habit of dying." "I know," she said, her voice grim. "I'm to be the third." A loud snore from her father made them both freeze. When the cabin fell silent again, Swift Arrow spoke with urgency. "There is no time. I can get you out of here. Tonight." Escape? The thought was a spark in the suffocating darkness of her mind. "But my father." "Your father would rather see you free than dead," Swift Arrow said, his words blunt but true. "And death is what waits for you with Sloan." He was right. Her mother had taught her that a life without choice was no life at all. Where would we go? North, to Fort Ellis. I carry dispatches for the commander. He is a just man. He will grant you protection. Fort Ellis was a 3-day ride, and that was in good weather. With Sloane's men hunting them, it would be a suicide mission. But staying was a different kind of suicide. I'll need a moment, she said, her decision made. 1 hour, he instructed. Meet me at the lightning-struck elm past the north field. Bring only what you can carry. Do you ride well? Since I was 7, she replied, a flicker of her old self returning. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. We will need it. He vanished back into the storm, leaving Catherine to face the impossible task of packing up a life in a single canvas sack. She moved like a phantom, changing into her sturdiest riding clothes. She packed her mother's Bible, the locket, and a small pouch of coins. She crept to the kitchen, grabbing bread and dried beef. In the corner, her father's hunting rifle stood waiting. She hesitated for only a second before taking it, along with a pouch of ammunition. She knelt beside her father's sleeping form, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. She wanted to hate him, but all she felt was a deep, aching pity. She kissed his forehead. I'm sorry, Father, she whispered. Then she slipped out the back door and into the moonless, rain-soaked night. The lightning-struck elm was a skeletal silhouette against the black sky. She was about to abandon everything she had ever known, to trust a man her people saw as a savage. But the alternative was Jeremiah Sloane, and whatever lay ahead in the dark, it couldn't be worse than that. Swift Arrow materialized from the shadows. He's not in the barn, he whispered, his words sending a chill down her spine. What? Sloane. He's not with his men. I saw him circle back toward the cabin after they started drinking. Catherine's blood ran cold. Had he seen her? Heard them? We have no time, Swift Arrow said, leading her to 2 horses hidden in the trees. One was his paint. The other was a sturdy bay. I borrowed it from Sloane's men. They were too busy with their whiskey to notice. They'll know it was me when they find the horse and I are both missing, she said, strapping the rifle to the saddle. By then, the storm will have washed our tracks away, he said, helping her mount. We ride for Crow Canyon. It's rough country. He won't expect it. She took one last look back at the dark shape of the cabin. Then she turned her face to the north and didn't look back. They spurred their horses into the darkness, the rain masking their escape. But they were wrong. Sloane hadn't circled back to the cabin. He had found something in the barn, a loose floorboard, and underneath it, a small leather-bound journal. It belonged to his second wife. As he scanned the pages by lantern light, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He didn't need to track them. The journal told him exactly where they were going and why. The hunt had just begun. They rode through the night, the treacherous paths of Crow Canyon, testing both riders and horses. When dawn finally broke, they emerged onto a high plateau, exhausted to the bone. We rest here, Swift Arrow said, dismounting in a sheltered grove of pines. Catherine slid from the saddle, her muscles screaming in protest. How far have we come? Maybe 20 miles, he said, handing her a waterskin. Fort Ellis is still 2 days away. Will he follow us this far? Swift Arrow's face was grim. A man like Sloane doesn't forgive. He will come. As they ate a cold breakfast of dried beef and bread, Catherine studied her companion. He moved with a quiet confidence that was both reassuring and intimidating. His face, with its high cheekbones and watchful eyes, spoke of his 2 worlds. You've put yourself at great risk for a stranger, she said. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping the horizon. My father taught me that all life is connected, a circle. To turn away from your suffering would be to welcome my own. He offered a rare small smile. My mother taught me that a gentleman never abandons a lady in distress. In her world, men used honor as an excuse to sell their daughters. This man, a supposed savage, lived by it. Thank you, she said, the words feeling small but heavy with meaning. As she was packing away their supplies, a glint of light on a distant ridge caught her eye. She froze. Swift Arrow was beside her in an instant, his eyes narrowed. 6 riders, silhouetted against the morning sun. Sloane, he said, his voice flat. How? She breathed. We covered our tracks. He has a tracker, or he knows something we don't, Swift Arrow said, already saddling the horses. There was no time to wonder. Within minutes they were mounted again, plunging into the dense forest that covered the eastern slope. They rode hard, the rugged terrain their only ally. Twice they were forced to backtrack, losing precious time. By midday, as a cold drizzle began to fall, they were fording a rushing stream when Swift Arrow raised a hand. Over the sound of the water, another sound echoed through the trees, the sharp crack of a rifle. A bullet splintered the bark from a tree just feet away. "They've seen us!" he yelled. They scrambled up the muddy bank and into the trees as another shot rang out. "They're too far to be accurate," Swift Arrow said, "but they're closing the distance." Catherine's horse stumbled, nearly throwing her. The animals were fading fast. "They won't last much longer at this pace," she gasped. "There's a place ahead," he said, his jaw tight. "An old trapper's cabin. If we can reach it, we can make a stand." The cabin was a wreck, barely more than a shell nestled against a rocky outcrop, but it was cover. They led the exhausted horses behind it and scrambled inside. The single room was musty and damp. "They'll be here in hours," Swift Arrow said, peering through a gap in the logs. "The rain will slow them, but they won't stop." "We could go on foot," she suggested, "and die of exposure before we get 5 miles, he countered bluntly. "No, we fight here." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "We need to split them up, draw them in. Can you shoot?" "Well enough to hit a deer at 50 paces, she said, "but I've never aimed at a man." "Let's hope you don't have to," he said grimly. "But if it comes to it—" "I understand," she cut in, her voice steady. "I won't be taken alive." As darkness fell, they prepared their desperate defense. Swift Arrow positioned her at the cabin's rear window. He would move through the trees, a ghost in the forest, using the skills his father had taught him to hunt the hunters. "If I don't return by dawn," he said, his voice low, "ride north. Don't stop. Ask for Captain Wellesley at Fort Ellis. Tell him I sent you." "I'll wait for you," she insisted. He paused, studying her face in the gloom. The frightened woman from the creek was gone. In her place was a survivor. He gave a single sharp nod. "3 shots if you're in immediate danger." Then he slipped out into the rain and was gone. Catherine pressed the rifle stock against her shoulder, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was alone, waiting in the dark for killers to arrive. Miles back, Jeremiah Sloan pushed his men on through the storm. "I want her alive," he snarled, his voice cutting through the wind. "The Indian, you can kill slowly." He wasn't just chasing a runaway bride. He was chasing a secret, and he would tear the world apart to get it. The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock a lifetime. The storm raged outside, a perfect mirror for the tempest in Catherine's heart. 3 hours since Swift Arrow had vanished. 3 hours of listening to the wind, wondering if every snap of a twig was one of Sloane's men. Then a sound, not the wind. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. She raised the rifle, her breath catching in her throat. A man in a wide-brimmed hat emerged from the trees, moving with a cautious stealth. He paused, studying the cabin. Catherine held perfectly still, her finger on the trigger. If he came through the door, she would have a clear shot. Suddenly the man stiffened. He turned, drawing his pistol, as if he'd heard something she couldn't. What happened next was so fast, so brutal, it barely registered. Another shadow detached itself from the forest. A hand clamped over the man's mouth, stifling his cry. There was a glint of steel, a brief silent struggle, and then the man crumpled to the ground. Swift Arrow emerged, dragging the body back into the darkness. He slipped back into the cabin moments later, a wraith covered in rain. "One," he said simply. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. "I thought—" "They've split up," he interrupted, wiping his knife clean. "It makes them vulnerable." He was breathing hard and a fresh scratch ran along his jaw. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He moved to the window. "2 more are coming from the east, and Sloane is circling north. He suspects a trap." She gripped her rifle. "What do we do?" "We create a diversion, and we run." He laid out the plan with rapid-fire precision. They would stuff her spare clothes with grass to create a decoy in the window. Her father's rifle, low on ammunition, would be rigged to a tripwire at the door. When they triggered it, the gunshot would draw the others. In the confusion, they would ride for Devil's Ravine. Devil's Ravine? She whispered. The name was a legend among settlers, a place where travelers went in and never came out. It's a death trap, he confirmed, which is why Sloan will never expect us to take it. It leads northwest toward Blackfoot territory. They won't follow us there. The plan was insane. It was their only hope. They worked in silence at setting the trap. The dummy in the window looked eerily real in the gloom. The rifle was set. They crept to the horses, hiding in the lee of the cabin, waiting. Soon, two more figures appeared at the edge of the woods. They separated, one creeping toward the front door, the other circling toward the back, toward the decoy. "Get ready," Swift Arrow breathed. The man at the front kicked the door. It swung inward. He took one step inside. The crack of the rifle was deafening. At the same instant, the second man fired at the decoy, the window exploding in a shower of splintered wood. "Now!" They burst from their hiding place, spurring their horses toward the northern trees. Shouts erupted behind them as Sloane's men realized they'd been tricked. A bullet whizzed past Catherine's ear. They plunged into the forest, riding blind through the treacherous terrain, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Soon, a jagged tear in the earth loomed before them. Devil's Ravine. In the storm-racked darkness, it looked like the mouth of hell. "Stay close," Swift Arrow yelled over the wind. "Trust the horses." They began the perilous descent, their horses picking their way down a trail that was barely a ledge. The sound of rushing water echoed from the blackness below. They were halfway down when a shout from above cut through the night. Sloan! He'd figured it out. Torches appeared at the ravine's edge. A rifle shot echoed off the canyon walls. They were caught. "We have to go faster," Catherine cried. "It's too dangerous." Swift Arrow yelled back, just as her horse stumbled, sending a shower of rocks into the abyss. It regained its footing, but the message was clear. One wrong step, and they were dead. Another shot, closer this time. Swift Arrow's face hardened. "There's a ledge ahead where the trail widens. We make our stand there." It was a small shelf of rock, barely big enough for the two of them and the horses. They dismounted, taking cover behind boulders. He positioned her on one side, himself on the other, creating a crossfire. "Wait until they're in range," he commanded, checking his revolver. "Make every shot count." The torches bobbed closer. The first of Sloane's men came into view, moving cautiously down the path. Catherine sighted down her rifle, her heart hammering. Could she do it? Could she take a life? Then a second figure appeared behind the first. Jeremiah Sloane. The sight of him, his face a mask of grim determination, erased all her doubt. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the ravine. The ranch hand cried out, clutching his shoulder. In that instant of chaos, Swift Arrow fired twice. Another of Sloane's men screamed and tumbled from the path, his cry cut short by the impact below. "Fall back!" Sloane roared, dragging his wounded man behind cover. The last man began firing wildly into the darkness. They were pinned down, but they had a fighting chance. Then, a lull. Sloane's voice echoed up the canyon. "Miss Blackwood, this is foolish. Send the Indian out, and I'll take you home." Her answer was another rifle shot that sent rock chips flying near his head. "That savage has poisoned your mind," he screamed. "The only man I fear is you, Sloane," she yelled back, "and I'll die before I become your wife." During the exchange, Swift Arrow tried to move to a better position. A loose rock clattered down the wall. The sound drew immediate fire. A bullet caught him high in the arm, spinning him against the rock. "Swift Arrow!" Catherine cried. "I'm all right," he gritted out, but she could see the dark stains spreading on his sleeve. Sloane saw it too. "Forward!" he commanded his men. "They're hurt!" Catherine fired her last two rounds, forcing them back for a moment, but now her rifle was empty. "Out of ammunition, Miss Blackwood," Sloane mocked. "Time to be reasonable." Swift Arrow pushed himself up, his left arm useless. "We have to move," he gasped. He pointed down the trail. "There's a fork. The left path leads to a cave, behind a waterfall." A bullet struck the rock beside them, showering them with fragments. They scrambled onto their horses and plunged deeper into the ravine, Sloane's enraged shouts echoing behind them. The path was a nightmare of slick mud and loose rock. Swift Arrow swayed in his saddle, his face pale. Just as their pursuers rounded the bend behind them, they saw it, a curtain of water cascading over the rock face. A dead end. "Trust me," Swift Arrow yelled, and urged his horse straight through the water. Catherine followed, her heart in her throat. Behind the cold spray was a hidden opening, a spacious cavern shielded from the storm. Swift Arrow slid from his horse and collapsed. "We're safe," he managed to say. "For now." Catherine rushed to his side, tearing strips from her petticoat to bandage his wound. The bullet had gone clean through, but he'd lost a lot of blood. As she worked, her fingers brushed his skin. In the dim, water-filtered light, the world outside fell away. There was only the sound of the waterfall and the man who had risked everything for her. He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat in silence, exhaustion and something more potent passing between them. Outside, Sloane was trapped on the narrow path, forced to wait for daylight. "When dawn comes," Swift Arrow said, his voice weak, "we follow the creek that feeds this waterfall. It leads northwest, toward Blackfoot lands." "And after that?" she asked, the question meaning more than just their next destination. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and serious in the gloom. "That depends, Catherine Blackwood. It depends on what you truly seek." The question hung in the air, unanswered. They had survived the night, but their journey was far from over, and Sloane was still out there, waiting in the dark, a patient predator with a hunger that would not be denied. Dawn's light filtered through the waterfall, painting the cave in shades of gray. Catherine awoke with a start, the memory of the previous night's desperate fight rushing back. Swift Arrow was already awake, sitting against the cave wall, his face pale but his eyes alert. "I checked the path," he said, his voice raspy. "No sign of them, but they haven't gone." He tried to stand, a sharp intake of breath betraying his pain. The longer they stayed, the more likely Sloane would find them. She checked his wound. The makeshift bandage was soaked with fresh blood. "We need to clean this properly," she said, her voice firm. She used the last of their clean water, her touch gentle but efficient. Her mother had taught her that frontier women needed to be doctors as much as wives. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, watching her. "My mother believed knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you." As they prepared to leave, they saw that Catherine's horse was lame. It wouldn't make it far. "We'll have to abandon him," Swift Arrow said grimly. Another tie to her old life severed. They led the horses out from behind the waterfall and down to the creek bed below. The water was icy cold, shocking their already exhausted bodies. "The water will hide our trail," Swift Arrow explained, leading the way. They walked for an hour, the cold seeping into their bones, before he suddenly stopped. Ahead, on the far bank of the creek, a young man was filling a water skin. He was Blackfoot. He saw them at the same time, his hand instantly going to the knife at his belt. Swift Arrow raised his hand in the universal sign of peace, then spoke in a language Catherine didn't recognize. The young warrior, though still wary, replied. After a brief exchange, Swift Arrow turned to her. "I told him we are pursued by white men who mean us harm," he translated quietly. "He says his hunting party is near. We should go with them." Trusting more strangers was a risk, but staying in the open was a bigger one. They crossed the creek to join the young man, who introduced himself as Running Elk. He led them into the trees where 3 more Blackfoot hunters appeared. Their leader, a weathered warrior named Black Wolf, regarded them with piercing, intelligent eyes. He questioned Swift Arrow at length, his gaze periodically shifting to Catherine, assessing her. "He wants to know the whole story," Swift Arrow said. "Tell him," she urged. "Tell him everything." Swift Arrow spoke for a long time, his words painting a picture of their desperate flight. When he was finished, the Blackfoot warriors conferred among themselves in low, guttural tones. "What are they saying?" she asked, her nerves raw. "They are debating," Swift Arrow said. "Some believe this is the white man's fight. It is not their concern." Black Wolf turned back, his expression unreadable. He spoke directly to Catherine. Swift Arrow translated. "He asks if you would truly rather die than marry this man, Sloane." She met the chief's gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. I would. Her answer seemed to satisfy him. He nodded once, then issued a series of commands. They will help us, Swift Arrow said, relief flooding his voice. Their camp is a half-day's journey north. We will be safe there. They set off at once, the Blackfoot warriors moving through the forest with a silent efficiency that was both incredible and unnerving. But the journey was taking its toll on Swift Arrow. His face was slick with sweat, his steps becoming unsteady. He was burning up with fever. As they crested a ridge, they saw the Blackfoot camp below, a circle of hide lodges nestled in a river valley. It was a vision of peace. But just as they saw it, Swift Arrow swayed, his knees buckling. He collapsed. Black Wolf was at his side in an instant, examining the wound. The skin around it was angry and red, the clear sign of a raging infection. The chief's face was grave. He barked orders, and his men quickly fashioned a makeshift travois to carry Swift Arrow down to the camp. As they descended into the valley, Catherine felt a new wave of fear. They had escaped Sloane, only for her protector to be struck down by a festering wound. The bullet hadn't killed him, but the infection might. Looking at his feverish, unconscious face, she made a promise. She had not come this far, survived this much, only to lose him now. The arrival of a white woman and an injured Lakota sent a ripple of curiosity through the Blackfoot camp. Black Wolf's authority kept the whispers at bay. Swift Arrow was carried directly to a large lodge at the center of the camp, where an ancient medicine woman with eyes as old as the mountains took charge. Her name was Star Medicine. Catherine tried to follow, but Running Elk stopped her. Wait, he said. Medicine work now. She was led to another lodge where a woman gave her a bowl of rich venison stew and, seeing her torn and bloodied clothes, a clean buckskin dress. The simple acts of kindness were so overwhelming that Catherine had to fight back tears. When she emerged later, washed and dressed, she felt almost human again. Black Wolf summoned her to the central fire. Through Running Elk's halting translations, he questioned her about Sloane. This man, he said, he will not stop at boundary lines. If he wants the woman and the paper for the land, he will come. Then he added, his voice like stone, but if he comes here, he will find warriors ready. The promised protection was a comfort, but her thoughts were with Swift Arrow. She was finally allowed into the medicine lodge. He lay on a bed of soft furs, his skin flushed with fever. Star Medicine was grinding herbs, the air thick with their pungent scent. His eyes fluttered open. Catherine, he murmured, you're safe? We both are, she whispered, taking his hand. He tried to sit up, but Star Medicine gently pushed him back down, speaking in firm Blackfoot. She says the wound carries bad medicine, he rasped. The bullet left fragments. The fever. It will get worse before it gets better. His grip on her hand tightened. If I don't survive... You will, she cut in, her voice fierce. You have to. Star Medicine gave him a cup of dark, bitter tea that sent him into a deep, fevered sleep. Catherine stayed by his side, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Her world narrowed to this one small smoky space. As night fell, the camp gathered for the evening meal. Healing songs, accompanied by the steady beat of a drum, rose into the night air, prayers for the injured warrior. Catherine sat, a stranger among these people, yet feeling more at home than she ever had in her father's cabin. Later, Star Medicine emerged from the lodge, her face a solemn mask. She spoke to Black Wolf, who then looked at Catherine. His expression was all the translation she needed. Swift Arrow's condition had worsened. The fever was out of control. She rushed back into the lodge. He was delirious, muttering in Lakota, his body on fire. Star Medicine had done all she could. Now it was up to his spirit. It was up to him to fight. You will not die, Catherine whispered, taking his burning hand in both of hers. I didn't escape one monster only to lose you to another. She began to talk, her voice low and steady. She told him about the future, about a place where they could be free, a life they could build. She spoke of things she hadn't even admitted to herself. Through the long, dark night, she held on, her voice a lifeline thrown into the storm of his fever, praying he would have the strength to grab it. Outside the lodge, the Blackfoot slept, but their scouts kept watch. Because Black Wolf was right. A man like Sloane didn't respect boundaries, and he was closer than any of them knew. The long night bled into a gray, uncertain dawn. Catherine had not left Swift Arrow's side, bathing his forehead with cool water, her voice a constant, low murmur. Star Medicine watched her, a flicker of approval in her ancient eyes. The fever was at its crisis. The next few hours would decide everything. "He is a warrior," Star Medicine said, her accented English a surprise. "But a warrior needs a reason to fight." She looked at Catherine, then placed a hand over her own heart. The meaning was clear. Catherine leaned close to Swift Arrow's ear, her lips almost touching his skin. "I need you," she said, the words stripped bare of all pretense. "Come back to me." Whether he heard, she didn't know. But she stayed, holding his hand, pouring all of her own desperate, newfound strength into him. All day he hovered in the gray space between worlds. Scouts came and went, reporting that the lands to the south were still clear, but the tension in the camp was a palpable thing. They were all waiting. Then in the late afternoon, she felt it, a subtle shift. The heat radiating from his skin seemed to lessen. His breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, deepened. Star Medicine returned and confirmed it. The fever was breaking. "Spirit hears you," the old woman said with a quiet smile. "Stays for you." By evening, Swift Arrow was conscious, his eyes clear though he was weak as a newborn. He looked at her as she helped him sip a warm broth. "You're still here," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Where else would I be?" His hand found hers. "I heard you," he said, his gaze intense. "Through the fever. I heard you calling me back." The moment was broken by a sudden commotion from the edge of the camp. Warriors were grabbing their weapons, their faces grim. Black Wolf was issuing sharp commands. Running Elk appeared at the entrance to the lodge, his face tight with alarm. "White men," he said, his voice low. "6 riders. Your man Sloan leads them. They will cross the river by morning." Catherine's blood ran cold. He'd found them. Swift Arrow tried to rise. "He won't stop. He'll burn this camp to the ground to get to you." "I know," Catherine said, and in that instant she knew what she had to do. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "This ends now. It's me he wants. I'm going to face him." "You can't go alone," Swift Arrow protested, struggling to sit up. "He'll kill you." "I won't be alone," she said. She laid out her plan. She would ride out to meet him, appearing to surrender. But Black Wolf's warriors would be hidden, waiting. They would use Sloane's arrogance and greed as a weapon against him. It was a desperate gamble, but it was better than letting this war come to the people who had saved them. Swift Arrow argued, but he was too weak. Star Medicine, overhearing, put an end to it with a torrent of furious Blackfoot that needed no translation. He was not to leave this bed. Catherine went to Black Wolf. She explained her plan, and the chief listened, his expression thoughtful. He studied her, this white woman who had come to them in fear, and was now proposing to be the bait in a deadly trap. "Why you risk yourself?" he asked via Running Elk. "Why not let my warriors fight?" "Because enough blood has been shed for me," she replied. "This is my fight to finish." Black Wolf gave a single sharp nod of approval. He began to outline a strategy, his hands moving to describe the terrain, the placement of his warriors, the timing of the ambush. Catherine listened, no longer a victim of circumstance, but a general planning a battle. The transformation was complete. She was not the same woman who had hung laundry by the creek just days ago. That woman was gone, burned away in the fire of their escape and pursuit. A new one had risen from the ashes, and she was ready to face the monster who had created her. At dawn, she rode out. The buckskin dress felt like armor, her father's rifle a familiar weight across her lap. Behind her, unseen in the hills and gullies, Black Wolf and a dozen of his best warriors moved like ghosts. They chose a small valley bisected by a creek. Catherine dismounted in the center, a lone, vulnerable figure in the vast landscape. Soon she heard them. 6 riders, led by Jeremiah Sloan. He reined in at the edge of the valley, his eyes narrowed, suspicious. But the sight of her, seemingly alone and defeated, was too tempting. He motioned for his men to spread out and rode forward. He looked worn, his face covered in a ragged beard, his eyes burning with a fever of their own. Obsession. Miss Blackwood, he said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. You've led us on quite a chase. It's over, Sloane, she said, her voice steady. I'm tired of running. Where is the Indian? Gone, she lied. I've come to make a deal. She slowly pulled a folded paper from a pouch at her waist. It wasn't the deed. It was her mother's last letter. But from a distance, it would look the part. The deed to the homestead. It's what you really want. Take it and let me go. His eyes locked onto the paper, pure greed burning away his caution. An interesting offer. Let me see it. First, tell your men to lower their weapons, she countered. He hesitated, then gave the signal. He walked toward her, his hand outstretched. She placed the paper on a flat rock between them. You can have it, she said. He bent to pick it up. That's when the world exploded. Black Wolf's war cry split the morning air. Warriors rose from the earth itself, arrows flying with silent, deadly accuracy. Two of Sloane's men went down before they even knew what was happening. Sloane reacted instantly, a predator to the last. He didn't go for the paper. He went for his gun, firing at Catherine as he dove for cover. The bullet tore through the air where she had been a second before. She rolled behind a boulder, bringing her own rifle up. The valley was chaos. The ambush was perfect. Sloane's men were surrounded and outmaneuvered. One surrendered. Another tried to run and was cut down. Only Sloane fought on, a cornered snake, firing methodically from behind the rock. It's over, Sloane, she yelled. Surrender! He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I'll see you in hell first, Miss Blackwood. He raised his pistol, taking aim at her. But before he could fire, a new sound joined the fray. The thunder of a single horse. Swift Arrow burst into the valley, his paint horse charging forward, a revolver in his good hand. He had disobeyed Star Medicine. He had come for her. The distraction was all Catherine needed. She fired. Her bullet hit Sloane in the shoulder, spinning him around. Wounded and exposed, he brought his pistol up for one last desperate shot at her. Two guns fired at the same time, his and Swift Arrow's. Sloane staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face, a dark red flower blooming on his chest. He collapsed into the creek, the water turning crimson around him. And then there was silence. It was over. Truly over. Catherine ran to Swift Arrow as he slid from his horse, his face beaded with sweat from the pain of his ride. You shouldn't be here, she scolded, her voice thick with relief. I couldn't let you face him alone, he gasped. I wasn't alone. She smiled, looking at Black Wolf and his warriors as they secured the scene. But I'm glad you came. In the days that followed, Swift Arrow recovered under the watchful and very disapproving eye of Star Medicine. The world outside their sanctuary seemed distant, unreal. One evening, sitting by the fire, they spoke of the future. You could go back to the homestead, he said. The land is yours now. I could, she agreed, but I wouldn't be alone. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. Unless you came with me. He raised an eyebrow. A half Lakota and a white woman? Your neighbors would have some things to say. Then we'll find a place that doesn't have neighbors, she said simply. Black Wolf, who had been listening, spoke. Swift Arrow translated, a look of astonishment on his face. He is offering us a home. Here. He says I have the spirit of a warrior. And you have the heart of a Blackfoot woman. A month later, when the first snows touched the high peaks, they stood before the entire tribe. They were formally adopted, no longer strangers, but family. Then Black Wolf spoke again, his voice echoing in the crisp air. He said that among his people, when two hearts chose each other, they spoke it before the tribe. Without a word, Catherine took Swift Arrow's hands. I fled a marriage of cruelty, she said, her voice ringing with certainty. Now I choose one of respect. I choose a life of freedom. I choose you. He answered her first in Lakota, words that felt like poetry, then in English. I will walk beside you, Catherine Blackwood, for all my days. There was no minister, no signed paper, but as the celebration began around them, under the vast, star-filled Montana sky, Catherine knew she had found her home. She had been running from a prison, but she had been running to this, to him, to a life she had never imagined, a life of strength and honor, and a love that was as wild and free as the land itself. If you enjoyed this story of survival and finding home in the most unexpected of places, then you're going to love what's coming next. We've got two more incredible tales picked out just for you, right there on your screen. Give them a click, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single story we have in store.